It is about a fella who was purposefully trampled by many, many women in high heels, in a real-life situation, and it did not involve anyone even having the fetish. When she told me this, I nearly died. The thought of this happening was awesome, the randomness to it. We got some trampling mileage out of this one, I tell you. When she was 18, she had organized a party at her place in the mid-80s, when high heel pumps were all the fashion, here in Australia anyway. Aussie fellas, not backwards in sinking the odd beer at a party, were in force. This one particular chap was totally pissed, drunk, very early on, and I think he may have also smoked some whoopee weed. My girlfriend remembered at least 6 to 8 girls, 18 to 25 years old, being present wearing high heel shoes. Some of those details are sketchy, unfortunately, but we can bet that was the minimum number of women wearing heels, probably more if he was lucky. There were, of course, many more girls in the total number of people there. Anyway, this bloke passed out, of course. Where? Right across the middle of the doorway to the kitchen, which also led to the toilet. He was facing belly up, with his stomach central to the door opening. Your imagination's working now? Everyone else being drunk. No one seemed to be bothered that poor old Tim had flaked it. Carrie, my girlfriend, had to go to the kitchen, as she was, of course, the chief caterer. She was wearing red stiletto pumps with a 4-inch fine heel. Another girl went to the door with her, but Tim's limp and very relaxed body was in the way. Of course they tried to rouse him, yelled at him, kicked him gently, but he was totally unconscious. The next bit will blow you away, and this is how Carrie told it. As Tim was not responding, they both put their heels on his chest and stomach, and started jabbing him, still yelling, pushing harder and twisting their feet. He was only wearing a thin cotton shirt. Carrie later demonstrated this on me when she was telling the story, and they did start to get very cruel. Remember, none of these people are into trampling at all, it's just situational. The two girls looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders, and at the same time stepped up and onto him, then off into the kitchen, with no thoughts for his safety or anything as it happened. They got what they needed, and walked out, again stepping directly onto his stomach. This had set the scene for the rest of the girls, as they all saw it, and had a great laugh at Tim's expense. From there, no one went out of their way to trample him, but because of where he was lying, and everyone had to go through there eventually, to the toilet, especially when you've been drinking, he was at their mercy. And as Carrie explained, no one cared. He was stepped on in heels hundreds of times, and he lay there for 8 horas. One girl arrived at the party, saw him lying there, and stepped straight up with both feet, turned around and yelled hello to everybody. Another girl, wearing white go-go type boots, but with the sharp fine 3-inch heel, was dancing next to Tim's body. Without a thought, she leaped a couple of feet onto his stomach, continued to dance for about 10 seconds, went to the toilet, and danced across his body on the way back. Poor bastard. Carrie's memories were the best, of course. She said she must have walked/stood on his stomach in her stilettos at least 50 times, as she was back and forwards to the kitchen for food. Then she described this. She remembers well coming back from the kitchen, asking people what they wanted, and she had casually stepped onto his stomach, all her weight on one foot. Then she hesitated. She distinctly remembers feeling her heel sinking into him. As other people were talking to her, she was distracted. But instead of getting off, she actually stayed there, and describes how she looked down to see that in fact her heel had all but disappeared. His stomach had gathered up around it, and she could not see her heel at all. I was feeling physically ill at this stage as she told me this, the fact that I had missed it. I felt I was going to throw up. She stood there for half a minute and said that she enjoyed the feeling of her heel sinking, and she was aware of it. I know when she trampled me, she always went for depth, the sink the heels factor, and this turned her on no end. I still have permanent scars from where she has refused to get off until she was satisfied. She insisted that she trample me in front of the mirror, as she was obsessed with looking at how deep her heels had sunk. There was a real evil streak there. So that's it, this poor bloke was trampled casually and purposefully for hours, by these women who were having a good time, and they did not care. Pity someone did not get a photo of the heel marks on him. Bet he was very sore the next day. Probably had no idea where the marks came from. Ha!